What's going on? Welcome to the Blue Shoes Fitness Podcast, where we talk about strength training, nutrition, faith, family, and how all of those things work together for parents like you and me. My name is Coach Jay, and today we have a Q&A episode. I'm planning on doing these on all of the episode numbers that are multiples of 5. So this is episode 20, and then I'll do another Q&A episode on episode 25 and 30, and so on and so forth. These are all questions that people and parents like you have asked in order to make this whole fitness thing a little bit easier. But first, we are going to kick things off with the verse of the week. And today I'm going to be reading out of Ephesians. This is Paul writing to the church in Ephesus, and this is Ephesians 3, verses 14 through 21. And as you're listening to this, I want you to think about this as a prayer that you can pray over yourself, that you can pray over your children, and that you can pray with your children, that they might be able to then pray over themselves as well. So this is a prayer that is applicable for anyone at any time, at any stage, and it covers a lot of bases. And so I'll be praying this over you as I read this here. For this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Now, to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Yeah, that's a wonderful passage, and that just makes me think of so many people, and in particular, it makes me think of our 2 daughters, of praying this over them, that they may come to know Jesus and his love that he's demonstrated for us by way of the cross, and the love that he continually demonstrates to us, and that his Holy Spirit has given us to be able to share with one another. So I love that, and I hope that kicks your day off on a good note wherever you're at in your day as well. All right, let's get into the questions. So here's the deal. We have 10 questions. I'm going to be going through 10 questions that vary across the spectrum of nutrition and training and mindset and motivation. Some of these are going to be a little bit more general and broad. Some are a little bit more specific. And as you're listening to these, I want you to think of kind of 2 things that are related. First, I want you to think about, are there any follow-up questions that these questions make you think of, whether they're related to the questions or if it's something entirely different, but that you're listening to these and go, oh, hey, that makes me think of this. And I want to know more about this. Feel free to always shoot me a message on whatever platform you're watching or listening to this on, and to shoot me a message with any follow-up questions that you have, and I would love to address those on future Q&A episodes like this. The second thing is that if there are any follow-up questions that you have about these, or any topics that particularly resonate with you, that you think, hey, that might be worth maybe an entire episode on, of going over a training split, for example, which is where we're going to be starting things off in the first question. If there's any of these topics that you think, hey, I would love to go do a little bit of a deeper dive into that, then let me know. Shoot me a message, however you want to get into contact with me. Let me know what it is that you want to hear more about, because these are questions that are likely going to be applicable to you in some way or another. But I am answering these for the sake of helping you, and so I want to know what it is that's going to be most helpful for you to go into either a deep dive or future Q&As as well. All right, let's do it. Question number 1, what's the best training split for building strength? So if you're not familiar with this concept of a training split, this is just the terminology for how your workouts are split up over the course of a week. And there are many different ways of splitting up your workouts. And I want to, rather than just going over what those different ways are, and which one might be better for certain situations or things like that, I kind of want to take a bigger picture, 10,000-foot view at this as well, to be able to share the principle and the concept behind why this might be an important factor. So I appreciate that there is the qualifier at the end of this question. What's the best training split for building strength? That's very important, because when you just ask a question of what's the best this, or what's the fastest this, or the worst this, you tend to not have very much nuance in that to be able to then give very contextualized answers to those questions. And so if it was just what's the best training split? Well, there is no one way to answer that because there's no one right answer because that depends on so many different variables. But if we have a little bit of a qualifier of for building strength, okay, now we know what the goal is. And so that's a little bit more helpful to be able to then tailor my response and focus, on that question. So, what's the best training split for building strength? So, real quick, there are many different training splits. Some of the more popular ones are splitting up your workouts by an upper body and a lower body workout, splitting up your workouts on total body workouts. So, doing either the same total body workout multiple times in a week or doing different total body workouts each day of the week. You have push pull legs. So that's upper body pushing exercises or pressing exercises, and then upper body pulling exercises, and then a leg day to finish that off. You have a vertical and horizontal split. So now you're looking at directions that you are pushing or pressing or pulling or squatting or hinging or bridging or any of those kinds of things. There are many different ways. The point being, there are many different ways of splitting up your workouts. And again, rather than doing a deep dive into those specifically, what I want to share is the mindset behind choosing a training split. And the idea is that a training split is actually a tool. It's actually the byproduct of your independent variable. So your independent variable that should actually be driving your training split rather than the other way around is your schedule. It's a very practical aspect of this here. But when you are building out your workouts, whether you are building your own workout program or if you're looking for one to follow and to join, looking at the schedule aspect of it is a really great starting point because that's a practical aspect that may be the least flexible aspect of your training program in that you might not be able to really adjust your schedule a ton. And so finding a workout program that you can then mold to your schedule is going to be a great way to do it. So take a look at the number of days that you are able and willing to work out. From there, you can take a look at the amount of time you have allotted on those days that you are both able and willing to work out. So, for me, for example, I am working out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And from the moment that my garage door goes up to where I leave for the gym to the moment that I put the garage door back up to come home is about I have about an hour and a half, maybe a little bit, hour 45. And about an hour of that I can allot to actually training between drive time and working out and all of that, or warming up. And so I know exactly what my parameters are. And so I build my workouts around that. It's very specific to my situation, but you apply that to yours as well. And when you think about the training split from there, then you can go, okay, if I have X number of days and X, number of minutes to be able to work out per day, you can kind of get an idea of what a good training split might be for you. So if you are only able to work out twice a week, doing a push pull legs workout split is probably not going to be great because you have three different workouts and you're only able to cover two of them per week. Likewise, if you have 6 days that you can work out, you might benefit from doing something that's beyond a 2 day split, like an upper lower split, unless you're repeating them over and over. So, the real practical aspect of this is going to be the scheduling. And so I'll leave it at that. And if you have any additional questions on the best training split from there, then you can shoot me a message as well. I will comment, I'll leave one more thought on that. The idea of for building strength specifically, if you are specifically looking at building strength as opposed to maybe like hypertrophy related goals, you can get away with doing a more limited number of exercises and doing them more frequently. So, for example, power lifters who are very much in the strength world tend to do variations of the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift. And they do that many, many times throughout the week. And it's not usually very high volume at any one training session, but you might be squatting 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times a week. Same thing with a deadlift and a bench press. So I'll leave it at that. Number two, how much time should I spend at maintenance versus a deficit versus a surplus? This is very context dependent as well, depending on what your goals are and depending on what your current starting point is at. And one of the things that is worth mentioning and worth focusing on here is the idea that you should probably spend more time at maintenance than the other two, which is kind of leads me to the thought that you should probably spend more time at maintenance than you are currently thinking that you need to spend at maintenance. There are many rules of thumb, and we've talked about these a little bit in the past as well, but there are rules of thumb about, spending at least as much time in maintenance as you do in a deficit. whether that's before or after. And same thing with the surplus. You can have some rules of thumbs about the time, the ratios between the two. But I don't know that it's super worth trying to dive too deep into that because it's going to be so different for each person. And maintenance is where I would like to see a lot of people spending more focus on maintenance and spending time there, because that's kind of the end goal, right? And to be able to maintain the results that you've accrued. And even if you are constantly wanting to progress in one area or another, you still are wanting to focus on maintenance from a maintaining your previous adaptations point of view. And so that's going to be a good place to spend the majority of your time throughout the year. If you think about going into a deficit for something like fat loss, maybe you think about doing that 1 or 2 or perhaps 3 times a year maybe, but it's not something that you should be doing every other week. It's not something that, you should be just doing indefinitely. You can't indefinitely be in a deficit, and that's a tough road to go down. And the same thing with the surplus too. I mean, you could indefinitely be in a surplus, but that's likely not gonna lead to the adaptations and progress that you are looking for. Question number 3, how important is form when working out? So, how important is your actual form in an exercise? It is maybe more important than most people think, but it is not the be all end all only thing that you need to be focusing on. There and thankfully it's kind of a dying thought process in a sense, but there has been a thought in the past where form is the top dog. It is so important that you just need to slash all intensity in your workouts in order to work on perfecting your technique to match what a textbook or a YouTube video or a coach has instructed you to do. And the truth of the matter is, people's form is going to look very different from one person to the next, in one exercise to the next, in one variation to the next, based off of a whole slew of factors, but not the least of them being that everybody's body is going to be built slightly different as far as size and proportions. And think about something like a squat, where depending on the proportion of your femur, your upper leg bone, to your tibia or to your lower leg in between your knee and your ankle, and your torso length, between your hips and your shoulders, the ratio of those 3 segments of your body is going to vastly vary from one person to the next, and it's going to greatly determine the positioning of your hips versus your knees versus your upper body in an exercise like a squat. And so there's no one right way of doing that. And if you get into this mindset that form is not only most important, but that it's like the only thing, that's probably not going to be a very productive way of doing things. Not to mention that good form is usually a range. And when we talk about good form, there are two main reasons why you might consider working on your form or improving it. The first is injury prevention. If your form is just so far out of, in left field, that you are risking strains within your muscles, within the connective tissue or joints or anything like that, then the risk reward of that is probably not going to be worthwhile. So you don't just want to be totally reckless with your form from an injury prevention standpoint. The other thing is that you wanna make sure that you are actually accomplishing the task that you're trying to accomplish by way of doing the exercise, and that task is usually to focus on a specific muscle group, a specific movement pattern, and if your form is not within the quote unquote "good range," then you may not actually be challenging or working that muscle as much as you think that you should be. For example, there's a lot of talk about, back training these days, and in particular with the lats. And if you're doing some kind of a pull down or some kind of a row, depending on what your form looks like and how you're approaching that and your positioning and how you are applying force and tension and momentum and all of that kind of stuff, you may not actually be training your lats as much or as hard as you think you are. Even if you're continually moving up in weight, you might actually just be compensating somewhere else by way of adding momentum, by way of uh, using additional supportive muscle groups, things like that. And so that's an example of a way that you might be progressively cheating instead of progressively overloading. And so when it comes to your form, we want to make sure that your form is supporting both the injury prevention side of it and supporting the, hey, what are you actually trying to get out of doing this exercise side of it? And so that's going to be my answer for this here is, how important is form? It's quite important, from those two aspects. But beyond that, trying to optimize the to the nth degree is probably not going to be worth the potential reward that you might get out of that unless you're doing some kind of competitive powerlifting or Olympic lifting or something like that. Number 4, best way to calculate maintenance calories. Okay, so I am really tempted here to share names of calculations and websites that have calorie calculators and things like that. Rather than doing that, I promise I want to be helpful here, but I also want to teach you to fish instead of just giving you a fish here. Uh, just about any calorie calculator for maintenance is going to give you some basis of a starting point to be able to go off of. The point of being able to use a maintenance calorie calculator is to be able to find a starting point. None of them are going to be perfect because, as much as they might be called calculators or that you use the phrase of like calculating maintenance calories, really what you're doing is you're estimating, and you can get a pretty decent estimate that will give you a good enough starting point to then be able to start collecting data. But none of them are going to be so precise that if you see a calculator that has 2,000 calories as your maintenance and one tells you 1,900 and one tells you 2,100, then you are within, on any of those three calculations, you are within a good enough and a small enough range to be able to go, okay, I'm just going to start there and see what happens. I'm going to see how my body responds. And that is going to be your most powerful metric that you can track, is what your body does with that sort of intake. And so if you are shooting for maintenance calories and you use whatever calculator online to be able to find it, and you can use a number of different calculators, try out a different number of different sites or apps to be able to calculate out your maintenance calories and just see kind of what the average of those looks like. If you see, if you're getting a lot of numbers that are 1,900, 2,000, 2,100, something like that, and then you get some random one that says like 1,300 or 3,000, then you probably know that those two on the extremes are maybe outliers and maybe not super close. But if you just start somewhere in the middle, you'll be able to collect enough data after following that for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, to be able to go, okay, if you are continually losing weight from one day to the next, perhaps that's below your maintenance. If you're continually gaining weight from one week to the next, then that's perhaps above your maintenance. And so I would not stress about which one is the best calculation or what is the best way to do this. What I would add to this is that there are a few different ways of calculating out your maintenance calories, and to make sure that your whatever calculations that you're using take these into account. The first is that you're probably going to find something that'll say like a BMR calculator, which is going to give you, if you were, the closest thing that we can relate it to is if you were in a coma and just not moving and just doing nothing besides purely surviving, that might be similar to your BMR of just your basal metabolic rate of how many calories you're burning just by existing, essentially. So that's helpful in a sense because that's going to be the bulk of the calories that you're burning on a daily basis. But you probably want something that's going to find your total daily energy expenditure, your TDEE, which is going to take into account how many calories you might actually be burning because you're not just in a coma laying there near lifeless, just surviving. You are likely going to be active beyond that. Even if you're not intentionally structuring out workouts and things like that, you're moving, you're walking, you're blinking, you're fidgeting, you're doing all of these things. And so having some kind of a calculation that takes into account your overall activity level is probably going to be a pretty helpful way to go on that. What are we on? Number 5. What are your top overrated exercises? Hmm. I did not think about this one prior to adding this to the list. What are your top overrated exercises? Oh gosh. Well, the next question is related to ab workouts, and that makes me think that most abdominal exercises are probably overrated in the sense that not only do are they often misattributed in the sense that people will often do things like sit-ups and crunches for the sake of being able to see their abs. So they're misattributed in the sense that it's not actually leading to the adaptation that people are thinking or hoping that it will. In addition, a lot of people don't need to spend extra time doing additional abdominal work because it is not, you're getting quite a bit of core work by way of your other lifts, by way of your heavy squats, your heavy deadlifts, your bench presses, your overhead presses, things like that. And so you are maybe not in a position where you need to be adding in, if you're listening to this anyway, you're maybe not in a position where you need to be adding in additional ab work into your exercise routine, in particular because if you're listening to this, you're a parent and you are maybe not wanting to spend any more time on your fitness than you need to. And perhaps even fitness is more of a means to an end. Maybe you do enjoy it to some degree, but that you're making sacrifices in order to spend that time working on your body, and you really don't need to be adding in crunches, sit-ups, that kind of stuff. So that kind of brings us into number six. How important is it to do ab workouts? Probably not very important. And in fact, probably very unimportant for most people. I am a big proponent of core training, and that's kind of a buzzword that's a little bit vague in a lot of ways, but I'm a big fan of making sure that your whole torso area is strong enough to be able to effectively transfer force and movement from your upper body to your lower body and vice versa. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be doing additional abdominal work or anything like that. There are plenty of ways of being able to be able to train those muscles just by way of, like I said, doing some of those heavier compound lifts. You can also do things like planks, side planks, dead bugs, bird dogs, things like that. I don't, and as much as those do train your abs, I don't know that I would probably advertise those so much as ab workouts for the sake of making sure that people don't confuse that with, "Oh, I'm gonna be able to see my abs if I do enough of these," because that is a matter of body fat, and that is not a matter usually of how the hypertrophy, local hypertrophy within your actual abs. That's usually not gonna be the deciding factor for most people. Number 7, is there anything in fitness or nutrition that you've changed your mind on? This is one of those questions that might make for an interesting episode in and of itself. So if you would be interested in hearing a whole slew of things that I've changed my mind on over, I don't know, the last 10 years of my fitness career, then let me know. I would love to chat more about this if that's something that you think would be helpful to be able to learn from. Something that comes to mind from a practical exercise standpoint, something that I was using as a tool on a fairly regular basis in my, you'll see it a lot in some of my older Instagram and social media exercise demos, are like the booty bands or like the mini bands, the little circular loop bands. And I'm talking about the little ones that are essentially just ribbons of elastic as opposed to like the huge, big loops that can add like 100 pounds of extra tension. The mini loop bands, the booty bands, as a lot of people referred to them as, I used to use those a lot as a way of demonstrating variety and ways of being able to challenge various muscle groups at home with limited equipment, with limited spend on equipment or things like that. It certainly didn't take up any room or anything like that. And I am on team mini bands are virtually useless these days. And that has come through educating myself as far as that there are more effective ways in most cases to be able to train those muscle groups or movement patterns without the use of those, and with using minimal equipment. Um, and it's also come from just a practice and recognizing that if it's something that is not very effective, and that can largely be misused or exploited by way of people trying to go viral on social media and stuff like that. That's something that I definitely fell into that trap, and no, that sounds like a victim mentality. I put myself in that trap in a lot of ways and wanted to make it work. And the reality is that there is very little use for them by any means for most people if you're listening to this. One of the other things that I thought of when I read this question was, if you've ever heard of SMART goals. This was something that in school, and I got my degree in exercise science essentially, and it was called exercise and wellness, but it was a whole exercise science and nutrition degree, and we talked about SMART goals all the time. And the acronym varies from one spot to another, but in general, it's specific goals, measurable goals, attainable goals, realistic or relevant goals, and timely or time bound goals that spells out SMART. And this was a way that we were really encouraged to be able to help clients to set their goals. And I have not abandoned SMART goals as a whole, but That is certainly not the law of the land that you need to follow as a coach or as someone who, if you're just trying to set your own goals, you do not need to have all of those variables put in place before you start working on your goals. There is nothing that says that you need to have such a specific direction that you're going in and such a specific end result and a specific timeline that that's going to make it any more realistic that you're actually going to achieve that goal. It is perfectly fine to approach a goal and to go, hey, I just have a general idea of where I want to go. I generally want to feel this way. I generally want to be able to do these things or feel better or be more capable or whatever it looks like. And you can start with that, and you might get more specific in those goals as you go along. But you might not need to be just over the top specific as you start off. So that would be those would be two things that I've changed my mind on over the years. Number 8, can you build muscle without adding body fat too? You can. It's not a great strategy. This is something that is possible. This is often called recomposition, body recomp. And it's possible, but it's not usually a good strategy. It's usually something that for someone who is a beginner, that's usually who's going to be in the best place for this to happen. It's usually something that happens as a byproduct of eating according to your goals and training according to your goals. It's not something that you typically set out to do. You don't typically set out to build muscle and lose body fat at the same time, or to completely eliminate or be afraid of any additional body fat that you might accumulate. Because if you're going to be building muscle, that's going to happen best in a slight surplus, a slight calorie surplus, which by definition is probably going to add some body fat along the way too. So I wouldn't be afraid of that. I would embrace that. And that might be a whole nother podcast topic as well, too, of how to do that, because that's a lot easier said than done. But yes, you can. I would not aim to do that. I would be excited if that happens as a byproduct. Number 9, any tips on motivation? I feel stuck and completely unmotivated to keep working on my goals. Any tips on motivation? To My first thought is to not focus so much on being motivated, but that's probably not very helpful. I would say that, and I've said this a lot, you've probably heard me say this before, but that motivation, the primary source of motivation comes from seeing progress and seeing results. And so if you are unmotivated, it's likely that you're not seeing the kinds of progress or results that you had set out for or that you had expected or hoped for. And so I would then take a look at that and go, okay, do I need to adjust my expectations? Was I just being unrealistic in my expectations? Or am I just not actually doing the kinds of things that I need to do in order to make the kinds of results and progress that I was looking for? It may be that the progress that you're looking to make is completely realistic, but you're just not doing the things that you need to do in order to reach that. And so that might be a good place to start, is take a look at your progress and how you feel about your progress, whether you're super stoked about it, which is unlikely if you're feeling unmotivated, but whether you're super stoked about it, whether you're really disappointed, whether you're somewhere in between, maybe you just kind of feel really indifferent or maybe even apathetic. And perhaps you maybe even need to just adjust your goals. Maybe the goal that you were working on is no longer as important or relevant to you. And so that may be a good place to start for you. Number 10, how closely do I need to track calories, protein, carbs, etc.? I just want to lose a couple of pounds. Exclamation point. How closely do I need to track these things? That's going to be very different from one person to the next. And this is where another one of those questions where the answer is that you need to form it to your situation and your goals. And what I mean by that in this scenario is that you may need to get really specific. You may not need to be as specific at all. Think about if you are setting a budget and you're trying to save up for a car. Let's say, yeah, big purchase. You're saving up for a car. If you are naturally with your current lifestyle able to save little by little, month after month, then you might not need to track any more closely than you already are. And whether you're not tracking at all, or if you already are, tracking it to some degree, you might not need to get more specific than that. Likewise, on the other side of it, if you are really struggling to save up, then you probably need to get a little bit more specific and a little bit more direct and focused on that. Same thing with what you're tracking as far as your food intake goes. If you are just tracking calories or tracking calories and protein, or if you're tracking all three macronutrients, that's going to be really dependent on your how your progress is currently going and what you're currently tracking. So you may need to take a look at your progress versus your results versus your expectations and going, okay, am I heading in the right direction at the rate and trajectory that I was hoping for? If not, well, you may need to get more specific. So that's my recommendation for how closely you need to track on all that. All right. We were just about out of time. I'll leave you with that. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. I'm Coach Jay. Thanks for hanging with me, and we'll see you next time.